Good morning, dear students. I'm glad to see you on our debate game in Lincoln Douglas format. So let's welcome our participants, Shyrailym and Arken. The motion of today's game is: this house believes that international university students must learn the language of new country. So let's start our game. The stage is yours.
Hi, I'm Lincoln, and our motion is that this house believes that international university students must learn the language of new country. And my first argument for this is that it will enhance communication skills in their cultural exchange. So by just learning the language of new country and standing for this, and just knowing the basic things, basic words, will help students and other exchange students on master's or bachelor's degree to level up and enhance their education levels, academic scores and others. So first and secondly, academic success also depends on the language level of students, so they must know the language of the country that they are going, and academic success, this would be essential, and by knowing the language of that country, students will understand the lectures and complete assignments, so they could have higher achievements. And the third argument is that it could also provide some career opportunities, open door to future and global job market. So if students know more than 2 or 3 languages of the country that they're going to, or as they're being like exchange students, they can also learn the language before going to there, and it will just open up for them new doors and have good intentions to their career. And thirdly is that language skills will enable effective communication with local residents. So while during their living and just studying there, they will integrate more with other cultures and host families and fellow students. It will make their daily life and interactions smoothly and more completely. And the next one is global perspective. By learning the new language, they can also go on to the global perspective. So most of the students that know more than 2 or 3 or even more languages, they have opportunities to work in such companies like Google or others, so they could be well known on this sphere. That's it. Depending from this, they will also be more independent in real life. So if they won't know the language of the country, they will depend only on their academic skills and achievements, even if they cannot speak or communicate with other people in that language. And their independence will totally depend on other people and on their friends that also know the language of their own countries.
So my first question is going to be, is achieving cultural integration is more applicable and favorable purpose of study? What if it would be more supplementary work?
I don't think it would be supplementary, because before applying to study for in another country, students must know even the basics, so they could study more fluently and they could know the basics and other stuff, and they can have more academic goals and achievements.
Okay, do students actually need global workplaces, even if they would like to work in the homeland firstly?
So why students go to study abroad is because the main reason for that they want to go up and open the new doors to the global perspective. That is why they often go to study abroad and to other countries as exchange students. So they could open up new doors to their future in global markets.
Okay, my last question is going to be, how can you describe more broadly how exactly they can be necessary to successful life? Those, I mean learning the language of the resident country. I mean that how can learning the new language be successful in their career of students?
So first of all, learning the new language can open and can enhance the cognitive abilities and skills, such as memorizing things quickly and other skills. So just during the learning of new language, students adopt some of the skills and abilities. So it could be just beneficial for them to learn them and then show their own skills on the global market.
Okay, thank you. Greetings, I am Douglas. And starting from my first argument that learning is new language, having language of residency is fact, does make the life work more easier. They provide certain advantages, but the language is not solely focused rather than the learning and education itself. First of all, it is a necessary expense. Learning a new language can be expensive, especially if you need to take classes or hire a tutor. It can be a financial burden for international students who are often already paying high tuition in living expenses. And it also burden for the time because it takes more time. It is limited duration. Some international students are on short-term programs or exchanges, and they might not have enough time to become proficient in terms of language and be fluent to talk to natives before completing their studies, making more practical focus, though solely on their coursework. And secondly, it is unnecessary for success actually. Many international students are able to succeed in their studies and careers without speaking the local language. There are many resources available to help international students navigate in the new country and culture without becoming fluent in language. In cases where students plan to return to their home or to work in their native country, home country, or pursue global careers that doesn't require proficiency in local language, they might opt to focus on the other skills and experiences that closely align to their own profession. And third one, it can be difficult to learn a new language, especially as an adult, for example, taking master's or PhD students. As older we get, the more difficult it becomes to learn new languages, and there's some kind of a human factor here. Fourthly, it is hard to translate classroom learning into everyday conversation, and it is hard to consolidate all those times together. And when you're learning in a classroom, or when you're studying language in a classroom, even if classroom is overseas, it can be difficult to stimulate organic conversations if you encounter someone in the street. And because learning is structured in a specific grammar, in a specific way, and vocabulary being taught, you might find that while you're a top student in the preparing class, you might be having struggle when meeting someone, a native speaker, for example, having a conversation. And culture shock will be overwhelming, and we should not forget about that too. Culture shock is real. And when you go abroad, it's hard to remember that everything you know and accept as normal, only biased on your cultural lens. Because while studying in the classes, you will be studying a grammar, a correct thing, for example, English language or any other one. Coming to a new country, a residence, they might speaking with a slang, and it will be difficult and cultural shock to the new students, both masters, both PhD, short-term programs, or even bachelors.
So my first question is, how will students study without knowing basics and living in another country?
Well, being shrewd in terms of basics, how to live in the country, and being shrewd in terms of laws, legislation, and rules in the countries does require the ability to speak freely and to have a conversation with other people. For instance, I might be shrewd in terms of how the legislation in the United Kingdom does work and where my rules begin and where they limit. And it doesn't mean exactly that I should be shrewd in the English language or I should know the Cockney accent of the English language. If I have such knowledge, that's the only thing that is required, basically.
So, and you also said about cultural shock. So would not that create cultural controversies if people of some country come and don't know the basic language or language? So won't they have controversies?
I think prior going to the country for the education, all students have to be aware of what their country are going to, in what cases their cultures do different and discern from each other. And this is something that they should do prior, and what they should be educated before that. I think finding like a medium in the terms of language and communication will not be as hard to both residential students and to both international students, and the language is not the main focus here.
Okay, and are students good enough to study abroad in another country if they don't know enough?
Could you paraphrase the question?
are students good enough to study abroad if they don't know academic words or academic vocabulary, and how will they study if there is no access to study in your country and, as you said, to translate it?
Actually, the term of being good enough in terms of quality of a student is quite a broad term, which could be translated and understood like solely and subjectively by everyone. As I understood the question, students can learn the language, can be good at classes, they can learn the language, but the main focus and the main idea, the main purpose of why they are going to the country is education. To be insured in accounting, for example, in a digital market. And the language is not the main focus, as I mentioned before. The main focus is the knowledge, the experience itself.
What do you think of differences in Asian and European languages in their culture, and how will European students learn and interact with Asian students?
As I mentioned before, the understanding of culture doesn't require the fluency in the language. For instance, a European student can praise Japanese culture, can praise anime, can praise their tradition, and can pay homage to them without knowing Japanese language. And in terms of that, they might be having a decent conversation between Japanese people and the international student on the topic of that cultural differences and maybe some things that they do have in common. But the language, as I mentioned before again and again, is not solely focused here. As the language is not a source that limits culture, it is a source that expands it and makes it more internationally applicable.
In contrary to your arguments, I want to mention that you said about culture shock, and if students don't know the language, they will be in culture shock. So, as you mentioned here, I think that your arguments, my arguments overweight your arguments in that case, because students will mostly have culture shock if they don't know something about their culture and something about their language. And how is that even possible to learn about the cultures and about their lives without knowing the language and without knowing even the words? And this just not knowing the language just limits their opportunities and life skills. However, you said that limiting language is not the only factor, that the main thing is expanding culture. And you also mentioned that language expands culture, and this also means that you are contradicting to your own arguments that language is the priority thing that could help us on the way of expanding culture and culture exchanges. And I also mentioned in my argument that communication and language skills are also available and attainable to everyone. And as you said before, about expansive and more easier languages, that for adults it is easier, it is harder and time consuming for them to learn languages. However, I think that if people want to learn in another country, such as in Ivy League universities, they must work on this hard. And during your speech, you mentioned that learning another language is much more harder and expensive and also time consuming as for adults and for younger students too. And you also mentioned about master's degree. And I think that in that case, adults that study master's degree have more access and opportunities to pay for their tuition, for their education, and as for their language courses too. So it won't be that expensive for adults learners and about their time. And when students and individuals want to learn and go abroad and study something new, they must know that is why they're not just spending time for something that they don't need. They spend their time for the thing that would be helpful in their further future lives.
Okay, first of all, your arguments stick with the academical background and the university life, whilst mine hit the culture, the life after the school, the university, the extracurriculars, and mine is more multifunctional and broad rather than yours. And yours were running around the bush with the one idea, that the academic background, that what impact it does to the university students or what it eventually brings to them. Secondly, nonetheless, I do agree that my arguments could be viewed as more apt on your side. But at that exact time, I was presenting both my opinion and objective view and vista to the question itself. Thirdly, your arguments run around my one argument of culture shock in adults, plus humorous three major arguments of, I should mention, it's unnecessary expense, limited duration, time consuming, unnecessary for success, and other ones. So taking into account all of my arguments and the fact that they represent a broad palette of how the university life to a student is, taking into account not only how he or she does work or study in the university, but how it is paying with the accommodation, not accommodation, but the pricing, how it is with the culture shock itself. Mine is more broad and takes into account more problems and more questions and more ideas than yours. Your arguments are quite linger the idea, the question itself, and mine are more stronger than yours because they represent and take into account many things. Comparing my world and yours and my opinion to the question yours, I would rather say myself that as more opt and more applicable idea and the opinion rather than yours. Because as I mentioned before, and I was mentioning all through during the game, that the culture itself and doesn't require being shrewd and doesn't require the understanding of the language itself. As presented to before, the example with a European student studying in Japan, European student can speak to Japanese people about anime, about their traditions, about their culture, and both of them will have some medium between them, even if they do not speak Japanese language. European student can pay homage to Japanese traditions, and the language here is not the source of limiting and putting a barrier to a culture. It is about expanding the culture and making it available to everyone, regardless of their language level. Thank you.
So first of all, what I want to say is that you said that I was more for academic things and you are for cultural. But I want to take a look to our resolution where it says that this house believes that international university students, so the key word is university, and I think that from my point, from all the points of views, that academic side would be more applicable than the cultural thing that you said and mentioned before. And you also said that I mentioned only about your cultural shocks when I also said things about money and time and adulthood and others. And overall, I want to say that learning the host country's language enhances life, enhances the exchange experience, enriches cultural immersions, and provides practical benefits both during and after the exchange programs.
It was a pleasure playing with you.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the game. That was the end of it. So let our YouTube viewers decide who is the winner of today's game. Thank you so much. Do not forget to subscribe and leave your comments.